Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 77, and you're watching two guys who most of you guys don't like to watch. Some of you guys fear us. I'm sorry about that. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And this episode of Anglican Unscripted is brought to you by the patience of Mrs. Kevin Carlson and Mrs. George Conger. And today is July 31st, 2013.
George, let's close out the show. Okay, people are watching and wondering, well, why is this the first segment? Well, I've been traveling around talking to people, and I've learned that people watch story 1, 2, 3, 4. They see Peter, they see Alan, but they usually don't watch all the way through the closing, so they don't get all the pertinent information. I had a person last week go, well, did George have an accident or something? Why was he wearing the collar? And I'm like, oh. This person doesn't watch all the way through, and I run into these people. So sometimes when there's an important information we need to put in an episode, we're going to move the closing to the first story, and this is that time. We need to raise money to have a hotel and food at GAFCON. We've got the plane tickets. I have $1,524 in the account. We need to have $2,400 in the account to buy two of the GAFCON food and hotel passes, so we can stay at the same hotel that the Americans are staying at.
Then we need money on top of that for 2 days before and 1 day after.
Yeah, so basically we need to raise another $1,500 if we can, please. So we're almost there. You guys have given us $4,500 in the last 60 days. That is amazing. Anglican TV has never raised that much fundage in that short a period ever. Thank you. It's been all you guys, but we really need some church rectors to write from their accounts. We need some churches to put money forward, not just laity. We need some of the laity who are better off than other laity to send us checks or do PayPal. But here's where you go, AnglicanTV.tv/donate. And you go to that website. If you look here on the left, I tell you exactly how much we have and how much we need. And I'm going to update that every other day to keep you informed. So if you keep coming back and say, oh, somebody else will give, guess what? They don't. If you haven't to give and you think somebody else will give, please give. And I'll update, and then there'll be a big balloon and party things on the website when we finally raise the money we need for the hotel and all the whatnots. We're going to GAFCON for you, because we're your eyes at GAFCON. GAFCON has given us permission to film start to finish, to film the outside activities, to do interviews with bishops, to talk about the future of GAFCON, to talk with all the principals. And this is the first time in a long time we'll be able to talk with all the primates of the GAFCON movement who have been separated now since the last GAFCON. It's an opportunity for you to see what's going on in the world. Help George and I. George, how you been doing?
I've been doing great. Friday marked the 6-month mark for my surgery. And folks, if you can remember, when I came out of the hospital, I was wheelchair bound and I was paralyzed from the wrists forward and the waist down. And I was in constant pain. And I've moved from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane. Now I just walk funny like an old man. I waddle. But I can use this hand, the right hand just completely back. The left hand I still am working on. Pain is still an issue, but hey, God has been good.
George, let's talk about story number 1. The Pope came back to America. He visited Brazil this week for World Youth Day. You're very unique because, as everybody knows, he's from Argentina, so coming back to South America was eventually going to happen. What probably wasn't expected was the absolute popularity this Pope shows in South America. He came back, and right now I'm showing a picture of a beach. It's a beach with a lot of people, 4.3 million people by the best counts. And there's not a lot of sunbathers here, George.
Now, it does look like Coney Island, New York on an August Saturday, but
yes.
No, this is World Youth Day, the final celebrations. Millions of young people and old people, but primarily young people, teens, young adults, celebrating the Christian faith, gathering to worship in the Catholic way, celebrating the power of Jesus Christ in their lives. It was a wonderfully successful event.
It was, and if you're looking at this picture, try and think of anybody else in human history who could draw this many people to a beach anywhere. Justin Bieber? No. The Rolling Stones? Can you think of anybody secular or Christian that can draw this many people to have a Eucharist on a beach? I don't think so. And I think that's kind of needs to be a wake-up call for the church, that people are hungry for what the church has to offer through Christ. And I think that's what's kind of been missing in all of these struggles with secular press, with secularization, is they tell us what the message of Christ is, and we've stopped telling us, people what the message of Christ is.
Kevin, you've hit on, I think, the key thing to take away from this. The reporting by the secular media about this story, about the Pope's visit from his arrival to his plane back across the Atlantic, has just been dreadful.
It has, because they missed some of the big stories. One of the bigger stories was the Pope talking about the Pentecostals. He says, hey, we're losing people to the Pentecostal church, and it shouldn't be happening because the Catholic Church understands that you can have a personal relationship with Christ too. Please don't go.
Mm-hmm. But instead, what we get in the Guardian, the Times, and the Washington Post are stories about, social unrest and liberation theology, things that are on the minds of the reporters. But really, you really have to twist and turn the Pope's speeches and the Pope's comments to miss what he's really saying, which is the salvific power of faith in Jesus Christ.
It was interesting. I watched CNN, their coverage, and every day they would have the protesters. They would videotape protesters, and it was the same 10 to 12 every day, talking about we want women in the church and we want sexual freedom in the church and no more contraception. And by the 10th day, the same 8 people, 10 people, 12 people, it got kind of old. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, okay, so this isn't a real story. What is the real stories? Well, the real stories is the Roman Catholic Church isn't changing their message, George, even though the press would like to say they are, because they had a little report of a little incident on the plane back to Rome where the Pope was interviewed by reporters, and the Pope said, in regards to women in the church, yes, we need more women in leadership roles of the church. To a secular press person, that means women priests. Let me write that down, women priests. And then he was asked the question, well, there's a lot of homophobia in the church. What is your message to gay people? And correctly, as a Christian, he said, it's not my role to judge. Whoa! Now, to a press person, that means Pope supports gay marriage. And nothing could be further from the truth, because I don't know if people have read the New Testament recently, but from what I get from the Old and New Testament is God is the judge, and the Holy Spirit's job is to help convict of sin, not the Pope. It's not the Pope's job to do either of those two. And ouch, George.
What you need to take away from this, you need to take away from the reporting about the Pope is check your sources.
Yes,
read
right.
what the Pope actually says. Don't read someone's opinion of what he says. But the second thing is, if you look at what the Pope was saying, and you look at the people in the crowds, and you look at the growth of Pentecostalism and evangelicalism in Brazil, what you're seeing is a desire for a relationship with Jesus Christ, a personal relationship. And what the Pope is preaching what the evangelicals and Pentecostals are offering. We Catholics, our church can offer that too. Plus you get Mary thrown in as well. There's a unity of purpose across this, of the power of a personal relationship with God. And the press, that's just totally extraneous to their mindset. There's a good news story in this. And, of course, it's not been told.
No, it's not. And let's go forward with this, because the Roman Catholic Church, with all its difficulties, is still not preaching a social gospel. A lot of other churches in the world, over here in the West anyway, have gone from the transformational gospel right full into the social gospel, and they're not drawing people to their churches. There's no 4.3 million people on any beach anywhere for the Episcopal Church, for the Anglican Church, for the Presbyterian Church, Lutheran Church. Go on down the road. And we need to reconnect and rediscover why they get to speak the same message they've spoken for 2,000 years and still draw the crowds, when we can talk about climate change and we get 2 or 3 people knocking on the door. George, story 1, we got to talk about the Pope coming to America. He talked about Jesus. Let's talk about Archbishop Justin Welby and what happens when somebody goes off script a little bit. Archbishop Justin Welby was giving some interviews last week to the Telegraph and other people talking about predatory lending. He wasn't talking about Jesus like the Pope did when he drew 4.3 million people. He was talking about predatory lending. He's the Archbishop. There's something wrong. I don't know. Okay. The Telegraph noted that, hey, you don't like Wonga and all these places. Let's do some research. And lo and behold, they investigate the pension plan. What do they find about the Church of England's pension plan, George?
Well, the church commissioners who manage the church's assets have investments in companies that are related to pornography and to payday lending.
Well, okay, so other than the, oh my gosh, this looks really bad for the Archbishop of Canterbury, this again looks bad for Lambeth Palace and the staff, George.
Yeah, there's a surface issue, which is incompetency at Lambeth Palace. The staff, they don't write Archbishop Welby's speeches, but they'd help him do the research. They help him prepare. Their job is to make sure he doesn't step into any potholes. And not only did he step in a pothole, he fell down and broke his ankle. This was that Justin Welby was made to look like either a fool or a hypocrite. And you don't want your man to do that.
No, I mean, cleaning your own house first is kind of a biblical concept. It goes with the old splinter in the eye, lumber in the eye thing. And you got caught with your pants down here. You can't go and preach something that you're not practicing. And there's nothing the press, especially in England, loves more than finding a hypocrite churchman, or the Anglican Church in England. So they found what they thought was a crook, and the press went wild. That's over. Let's talk more about the problem. Okay, the problem is when archbishops start talking about topics that aren't related to Christ. When you're the Archbishop of Canterbury, you get to talk about Jesus all day long, and nobody can say a word. You know, that's your job, is to preach the transforming love of Jesus Christ. When you get off topic and you go after these things that the secular world is pointing out to you, this will happen. Yeah, you and I both have. You're in a pension plan with Tech, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you have no idea what they're invested in.
Oh, I assume they're invested in asparagus farms and windmills and
carbon credits. I'm even in a hedge fund, a mutual fund. I have no idea where they go, but they make me money, and I try to. It's not the porn industry or the predatory lending industry, but that's just the way it is, and there's no way to account for every penny when you give it to somebody else to make the money for you. But this is what happens when you go off topic.
Kevin, I come from this, and I guess the word to use is from a pietistic background, a pietistic faith. I do not believe the Archbishop of Canterbury should be making policy arguments. In other words, I believe the Archbishop of Canterbury should be preaching Jesus and converting people, bringing them to a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And those people who are converted, they should go after payday lending, they should go after this and that. But it's not the church's job to be an arm of social reform or action. Preach Jesus, not social justice.
Well, I would even go a step further, George. If you're preaching a transforming love of Jesus Christ and you're converting the England of which you live in, those people will be transformed and will not need payday lending. They will not be drawn into instant gratification. They will not be drawn into the winds of the world. They won't have to go after payday lending, because payday lending will collapse. Because
Kevin, you're absolutely right. The church should. credit unions are a wonderful thing. They help build up communities. They're an economic solution to the deprivation the Archbishop of Canterbury is seeking to address. But Justin Welby should be preaching thrift, not credit unions. How does society change? You know, look at slavery. It was the Wesleyan movement. It was the evangelical revival. It was William Wilberforce, a layman, who ended slavery in the British territories. It wasn't the Church of England. Now, the Church of England, many of its evangelical leaders pushed this line, but it was the laymen and laywomen of the Christian world who, empowered by the knowledge and love of Jesus Christ, changed the world. If the church is doing it to do it because it's doing for it, a top-down solution never works. And Justin Welby, I think, nothing is going to change. If they shut down these payday lenders, people will just go to loan sharks. Until you change the culture, nothing's going to change.
George, we're going to talk a little bit about international news. We talked about the Pope in South America. We talked about the Archbishop of Canterbury in England and his story. We're going to talk now about Recife. And let's bring some of the viewers up to speed, because Recife has been going on since about 2005. And they have a bit of background. If people want to know, they're at the little tip of Brazil there, and get your globe out, spin it, Argentina, Brazil, Recife. What's the story, George? The history.
Well, the history. Well, this past week, a court in Pernambuco found in favor of the National Brazilian Church against the breakaway Diocese of Recife, and said that the property of the diocese belonged to the National Church. Now, the case is going to be appealed, and basically this is another Episcopal Church property issue, but this time it's taking place way down south. And, oh, by the way, it is being financed by 815. So, yes, our tax dollars at work in the Episcopal Church. 2005, Robinson Cavalcante, the evangelical bishop of Recife, was kicked out of the National Church because of incivility. He would not, that was the actual term, incivility. He would not go along with the liberal agenda of the rest of the church. And when he was kicked out, they also kicked out 30-plus priests, that was roughly 90% of the clergy, and 90% of the people followed them out the door. And the Diocese of Recife first was affiliated with Greg Venables of the Southern Cone, and then with Bob Duncan of the Anglican Church in North America, and has been part of the ACNA meetings ever since. Now, in 2012, Robinson Cavalcante died, and a new bishop, Miguel Ochoa, was elected.
Now, what's happened, basically Tech won another one. They won in Tanzania by buying off the election here. They've certainly had some good influence here with the church in Brazil and helping fund lawyers and do whatever they do. They do that very well. However, you need to look with your eyes to see what happened. If you look back over the last 8 years, you'll see that one church grew. Really, really grew, George. What happened to the Church of Recife once they left Brazil?
The Diocese of Recife has essentially doubled in size. And at the same time, the Anglican Episcopal Church in Brazil has continued to tank. I believe, from what I have seen, that it has declined by a third in the same period that the diocese has doubled. And, you know, we in our first segment talked about the challenge to the Catholic Church of the evangelical and charismatic groups in Brazil. Well, the Diocese of Recife, the Anglican Diocese of Recife, is one of those evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal groups that are attracting people like wild. Okay. Recife is the poorest part of Brazil, and it yet has been able to win souls for Christ again and again and again in circumstances that we in the United States would think would be impossible to do anything. They have been wildly successful. And though, I guess what we need to understand is that, yes, it's terrible that the good guys lost one down south, but this is not going to detract or dissuade them from carrying on preaching and teaching the good news of Christ.
No, and what's interesting is Recife is also an example of the failure of the Anglican community as a whole. Recife was one of the first dioceses to apply to the panel reference and seek some type of help from Rowan Williams, you know, some type of oversight. Help us out here. We have people who are preaching heresy and we're preaching the gospel. Can you throw us a bone? What happened, George?
The panel of reference, I don't think, took the case. Instead, the Archbishop of Canterbury sent 2 bishops, an English bishop and I believe Bill Godfrey of Peru, out to look out and see what was happening. They wrote a secret report, which Rowan Williams received, filed it.
That's it.
And that was that.
And what's interesting here, we know things. The report was kind of critical of the characters on both sides. Nobody here is perfect. You know, the idea of leaving heresy, that's fine, but you know, the characters playing the roles here were not perfect, George.
And one of the things that has been going on behind the scenes in Recife is that there have been talks between Bishop Miguel Ochoa and the new primate of Brazil to try to find a way forward, because these are irreconcilable groups. They're different faiths, and they recognize that, and they want to get on and do their thing. The Brazilian church is wholly behind gay marriage and the sort of liberal wing of the Episcopal Church, while Miguel Ochoa is wholly behind and part of this growing evangelical wing in the Anglican Communion. They're one of the GAFCON stalwarts. And they're saying, okay, let's try to figure out a way to make this thing all go away, because we're just throwing away money that better be used elsewhere. However, the local bishop in Recife, who was put in by the Brazilian church, has fought this tooth and nail, and he has not wanted to let go. Now he's got his court victory. And now it's going to go to appeal. People are still going to spend money.
Yeah, the money hasn't stopped, but we get to look at the fruits and we get to look at the numbers. Recife growing, Brazil declining, and that's the bottom line. George, we're going to move on here to a local story finally. We're going to talk about the South Carolina situation. It continues. I was at Forward in Faith last week and wasn't really following the news, but the news happened anyway. Apparently this gentleman, Bishop von Rosenberg, a cool name for a villain. If you're looking for a villain name, von Rosenberg would be great. Sends out letters to all the priests in the official diocese of South Carolina and says to them, you're deposed, George.
Yeah, on June 21st, the Standing Committee of the Episcopal Church in South Carolina unanimously deposed all those who had not sworn their fealty to Bishop von Rosenberg and their faction. In April, Bishop von Rosenberg sent letters to everybody asking them where they stood. And basically those guys who didn't respond, who everybody knew were with Mark Lawrence, were kicked out of the Episcopal Church. Now, the response from the Lawrence gang has basically been, so what? We're on our way. We don't need to look behind us as the door closes. But if you're a believer in rules and order and good government and things being done according to properly, this is just another example of the Episcopal Church's mafia business practices. There is no such thing as the Episcopal Church in South Carolina that has the authority to depose anybody. I don't care if Catherine Jefferts Schori thinks that she's God on earth and can do what she wants, but we have canons and we have rules. And once again, those canons and rules have been wiped away to allow a mob response to an action. It's dreadful.
It's dreadful. It's kind of like the 8th chapter of Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry, Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Flies. You know, at some point, things just completely break down and people start dying. And these depositions are exactly that. Nobody has the authority to do it, but it's happening anyway. And I was talking to a bishop from England the other day, and they had no idea that there was more than 50 or 60 people deposed. When we mentioned the numbers are north of 500, they're all freaking out. Well, when did this happen? Excuse me? It's been happening since Catherine Jefferts Schori took office. That's what she does. She does it very well. The people who were in Quincy, the people who were in Fort Worth, the people who were in San Joaquin, I'm missing a couple of dioceses, I'm sorry, got deposed. Those are clergy of deacons, priests, bishops, who got letters saying you're no longer able to preach and give sacraments under the Episcopal Church's authority. That hurts.
Well, this is, again, an example of the failure of the House of Bishops to do their job. We have bishops in the church either who are fully in bed with Catherine Jefferts Schori on the liberal agenda, or they're so timid, they're so afraid, they're so beaten up that they just won't speak the truth. They will go along to get along, and when they're at home, they'll say nice things to keep people happy, but when they're in their meetings, they are not standing up for what is right and true. They don't have to agree with what Mark Lawrence did. They can think it's terrible that he withdrew, but they still should stand and be faithful to the institution and the organization and the rules rather than to the political powers that be. It's the bishops who have once again let down the Episcopal Church.
George, let's move on to our next topic, and we're going to talk about the Forward in Faith statement. And it's in the news, it's in the internet. I am a longtime friend of Forward in Faith. I attend their assembly every year. I videotape it, I put it on the internet. Forward in Faith people are big fans of Anglican TV. They're big fans of Anglican Unscripted, and I'm big fans of Forward in Faith. They put out a statement this week that has made the internet rage sensation because people are always looking for a controversy where there is none. There are changes between their previous statement, which just supports an all-male clergy and 2 sacraments. This one kind of takes the Catholic nosedive and really points out the 7 councils and all those types of things. And some people have backpedaled on it. Some people have said, I'm not sure what they mean. It doesn't look Anglican to me. And I look at it, I said, well, it looks Anglo-Catholic to me. George, am I wrong?
No, Kevin, you're absolutely right. This statement is a tremendous success if we want to know what Forward in Faith stands for.
Yes.
If we want to know what these guys believe.
Yeah.
If it's meant to be a statement of the future of Anglicanism, whoa.
It's not that.
Now, for instance, I couldn't sign off on most of this statement. For instance, it talks about transubstantiation. I don't believe in that. It talks about 7 sacraments. I believe there are 2. It talks about the 7 ecumenical councils or general councils. Well, I only think that 4 are binding. Like number 7, for instance, requires every church to have a relic in it. Now, my little church in Avon Park, Florida, we have relics, but it's usually old ladies' handbags that were left in the ladies' room. We don't have the fingernails of saints. You know, I'm being silly, but the point is that there's nothing. I respect those who hold to those theological positions, but they certainly aren't ones that are universally accepted and shouldn't be construed as speaking for all of Anglicanism.
Yeah.
It speaks for a group within the Anglican fold.
This is Forward in Faith, and I'm pleased with their statement. I don't hold to it all either. I'm a 2 sacrament guy. I'm an 39 articles guy. I can quote them all, 39 of them. That's just who Kevin is. Now, and I don't see a conspiracy where there isn't one. And it's so interesting to see the internet explode over, what's Bishop Ackerman trying to do now? Hey, we saw Kevin Donlin there. He did this, didn't he? I'm like, oh, please, people. There's bigger controversies in the church than Anglo-Catholics putting out an Anglo-Catholic statement.
Well, what I think would have been helpful is some sort of statement that was released at the same time as this document. Because Forward in Faith puts out statements all the time, and nobody pays any attention to them. I'm sorry for saying that, but Reform and other groups put out statements on every issue, and people look at them and say, okay, that's their take on this particular stance. Why is this one blown up? Why are we so engaged about this compared to everything else that's going on? I think it's because people are so uncertain as to the way things are going forward. See, GAFCON was going to be this umbrella organization that was going to sort of help all of us, charismatic, evangelical, Anglo-Catholic, high and dry, all go forward together as Anglicans. And the GAFCON movement has sort of, I don't want to say it's collapsed, but it's disappeared.
Yeah. Well,
and so those groups that are more efficient, like Forward in Faith, that can sort of define themselves, that's great for defining themselves, but it leaves the others who are sort of left high and dry by the disappearance of GAFCON wondering, well, where am I now?
Well, that's the best point of all this, is the people who are freaking out aren't freaking out because Forward in Faith define themselves. they're freaking out because Anglicanism is not defined. You know, we have Calvin Anglicanisms, we have Augustine Anglicans, we have Wesleyan Anglicans, we have Anglicans all over the place, and there's no form, there's no function, there's no definition. And so when they see a group that actually defines themselves, and you know, they go, oh my gosh, that makes me look bad. Well, you look bad because you have no definition, not because they do. And you know, I wouldn't freak out about this. Anglicanism is in a struggle to find its identity right now. GAFCON may have hope in that and provide for that. I don't know. Yeah, we still don't know.
We need people to. What I'm trying to say is that we need to realize that the only person who takes joy in the recriminations within the Anglican world over this statement is the evil one, who sees the forces of good being divided rather than united. Can I say Catherine Jefferts Schori is the evil one?
No, you can't say that. You got it, George. Boom, baby. Ah, all right. So.
Do you want to do it again?
No, I like it. I like
Okay.
the way it was. I like how you sat there and you were being thoughtful in how you said it.
Oh, no, it was
Yeah.
the cramps over the
Yeah,
anchovy
the cramps.
pizzas.
All right. This is going to be fun.
I'm so glad we did it today because I feel so much better, so much more alive, and
Yeah, I was worried because you didn't reappear in the morning. I said, uh-oh. I said, uh-oh, where's
no,
George?
George is having teenage daughter problems.
What's that like? I had a conniption last night from the 16-year-old. Oh my gosh. It's like you have hormones, don't you?